It was the screech of folding chairs tumbling over and someone shouting, "You're going to run over the wedding cake," that made me pause the tractor's throttle. I wasn't expecting to hear a string quartet or see a woman in a white dress throwing her bouquet in my backyard, but there she was, spinning in horror as my 12-ton tractor rumbled into view like an angry dinosaur in a rom-com. I had told the dealership to deliver it on Saturday. I had the field cleared, the timing perfect, and a signed invoice on my clipboard. What I didn't have was a bride screaming at me because my John Deere just ruined her aisle runner. The funniest part, I had never seen any of these people before in my life, and they definitely weren't invited. That morning had started off like any other. I was up early, sipping coffee on the porch, enjoying the kind of peaceful sunrise only a rural property can offer. My name's Jack, and I live about 20 miles outside of town on a piece of farmland left to me by my grandfather. It's quiet, surrounded by trees, and most people think it's abandoned unless they know me. I've been planning to expand operations this year, which meant heavier equipment, and today was the big day. My new tractor was being delivered. A beauty with precision control, wide tires, and GPS-guided tilling. Everything a man with land dreams about. I had marked the gravel path for the delivery truck and made sure the lawn would be clear, but when I stepped outside around 10:00 a.m. to check the back gate, I froze. There was a white tent in the middle of my lawn. Not just a tent, a whole wedding setup. Rows of chairs, silk drapes, even a stage. I thought maybe I was hallucinating, but then a woman in high heels and a rhinestone mother of the bride shirt strutted past me shouting about champagne flutes. That was when I knew this was real. I didn't recognize a single face, but everyone acted like they belonged. Guests in pastel outfits sipped drinks. A DJ was testing sound levels, and someone was setting up a floral archway right over the concrete slab I used for tool storage. I approached a woman in an aggressive pink hat who was shouting at a man about centerpieces and asked what was going on. She barely looked at me and said, "Don't worry, the wedding will be over in a few hours. You'll hardly notice us." It took me several deep breaths not to explode. That's when I spotted her, Karen, the legendary Karen from the nearby HOA community. The woman whose entitlement had reached mythical proportions around town. I had only seen her once at the post office berating a clerk over stamps. She turned toward me with a practiced smile and said, "Oh, Jack, you're here. We were hoping you wouldn't mind. It's just so scenic out here, and your lawn was just too perfect to pass up." I blinked, confused. "You're having a wedding here, on my land." She scoffed like I just asked if water was wet. "Technically, it's only a few hours, and we're not damaging anything. We assumed this area wasn't used. It's not like you have a pool or anything. The guests won't even go inside." "You assumed?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around it. Karen waved her hand dismissively. "The groundskeeper mentioned it'd be fine. You weren't around to ask, so we just made it work. We'll be gone by nightfall." I had no groundskeeper. What I did have was a massive machine on its way to dig this field into orderly rows, and what she had was the gall to use my land as a backdrop for her daughter's wedding without so much as a knock on the door. I opened my phone and checked the ETA. The dealership had just texted. They were 10 minutes away. I looked at Karen again. "I have a tractor delivery coming today." She blinked. "Well, can't you reschedule? It's coming on a flatbed. They're unloading it today." "I planned this a month ago." Karen turned pale for a second, but recovered with an obnoxious smile. "Then tell them to go around. We're only going to be here until sunset." I wanted to laugh, but it was like my lungs couldn't believe what they were hearing. "Lady, this is not a public park. This is my backyard." She put a manicured hand on my arm like I was some kind of child and whispered conspiratorially, "Jack, be reasonable. You don't want to be that guy. This is my daughter's big day." I stepped away. "You're on my land without permission. If anything gets damaged, I'm holding you personally responsible." Karen sighed as if I was the one being rude. "It's always the quiet ones, isn't it? You never smile in the HOA meetings." "I'm not even in the HOA." I snapped. That's when the semi appeared over the hill, carrying my bright green tractor like a war chariot. I grinned. Well, looks like the wedding's got a new guest. As the truck backed down the gravel, guests began to murmur. Karen's daughter, in full bridal gown, stepped outside the tent and gasped. The wedding photographer started to argue with the driver, who ignored them and continued positioning the ramp. Karen stormed toward me, finger raised, demanding that I stop the delivery. I shrugged and said, "Sorry, this was scheduled." "You weren't." Then came the best part. The tractor's massive tires rolled down the ramp just as the flower girl walked into view. Someone screamed. A groomsman tripped over a folding chair. The white aisle runner started flapping under the wind kicked up by the engine. The chaos had begun. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply stood there watching the results of Karen's unchecked entitlement unravel in real time. Because when you try to steal someone's land for your fairy tale wedding, don't be surprised when reality shows up in diesel-powered boots. The sound of the tractor's engine drowned out the violins, and the driver, an older guy with grease-stained jeans and the patience of a stone, just sat calmly behind the wheel as if he didn't have a wedding unraveling around him. Karen shouted something unintelligible at him, flapping her arms like a furious peacock in heels, but he barely flinched. Her daughter, the bride, stood frozen at the edge of the tent with her veil stuck in one of the flower arrangements. Trevor, the groom, looked like he regretted every life decision that had led him to that exact moment. Meanwhile, I walked toward the tractor's path, carefully observing how perfectly it lined up with the tire markings I'd chalked onto the grass a week earlier. My field had been prepped, the soil tested, and the slope measured. This was no accident. This was scheduled progress. That's what I told myself to keep from laughing as the tractor began its slow crawl forward. The chaos behind it picked up speed. A man in a blue suit tripped trying to move a chair out of its way and ended up knocking over an entire table of appetizers. A champagne bottle popped open at the worst possible time, spraying across a bridesmaid's pastel dress. The DJ, trying to save his speakers, unplugged his gear and began frantically packing up. Someone's kid tried to climb the tractor's rear tire until the driver leaned out the window and yelled, "Hey, not a jungle gym, kid." Karen, now bright red and panting, stormed up to me again with her phone in hand. "I'm calling the police," she hissed. "Go ahead," I said. "Make sure to tell them you broke onto private property to host an unauthorized wedding." "You're unbelievable," she snapped, clutching her pearl necklace like it might bring her divine patience. "You could have said no when we set up." "I wasn't even home," I replied, crossing my arms. "You never asked." Karen turned on her heel and marched toward her SUV parked on the edge of my gravel driveway like it owned the place. She threw herself into the driver's seat and positioned it right in front of the tractor's path. The driver honked, leaned out, and shouted, "Lady, move the car." She didn't. She folded her arms, daring him. The bride ran over, tugging on her mother's door and yelling something about not ruining the pictures. Trevor stood off to the side with two groomsmen, clearly reconsidering the entire marriage while sipping from a paper cup. I leaned against the fence post, watching the drama unfold like I'd paid for a front row seat. The wedding planner, a woman who clearly hadn't been paid enough for this gig, tried to mediate. She approached me with a forced smile and said, "Maybe we can find a compromise? If we just delay the tractor for another hour, the ceremony will be over, and we can be out of your hair." "I scheduled this equipment months ago," I said calmly. "You people showed up today without permission and took over my land. Now you want me to pause actual work to accommodate your mistake." She looked like she wanted to cry. "I wasn't told this was unapproved. I was hired by Miss Karen and told she had permission. I wouldn't have brought all these people out here otherwise." I pointed toward Karen's car. "Take it up with her." At that moment, a loud crunch echoed through the field. The caterer's van, trying to back out from behind one of the floral stands, clipped the side of the decorative arch and dragged part of it across the lawn before getting stuck in a patch of soft ground. Half the arch leaned sideways, the flowers torn and scattered. The wedding photographer screamed. The bride screamed louder. The DJ looked like he was seriously considering a career change. Karen still didn't move her SUV, so I made the call. I dialed the sheriff's office and explained the situation. Unauthorized wedding on private property, refusal to vacate, and interference with a scheduled delivery. They said an officer was already en route due to noise complaints from another neighbor down the road. I guess I wasn't the only one being ambushed today. While we waited, the atmosphere turned colder. Guests began whispering, some edging toward their cars. A few had the decency to look embarrassed. One elderly woman tapped me on the shoulder and said softly, "I had no idea this wasn't arranged with you. This is a mess." I nodded and offered her a seat on the porch. She declined and walked away, shaking her head. Karen finally emerged from her SUV when she saw the sheriff's cruiser turning onto the gravel. She straightened her blouse and walked over to the edge of the lawn like she was the homeowner ready to explain an inconvenience. The officer stepped out, took one look at the disarray and said, "Okay, what exactly is happening here?" I spoke first. "They're hosting a wedding on my lawn without permission. That's my tractor scheduled weeks ago. She's blocking it. I have video, documents, everything." Karen interrupted. "We had verbal approval from the property manager." The officer turned to me. "You have a property manager?" "Nope," I replied. "I own this land. No one else lives here. No one else manages it. And I've never spoken to this woman before today." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, do you have any written permission to be here? Any kind of contract?" Karen hesitated. "It was arranged through the wedding planner. They should have the details." The planner, still trying to salvage her career, shook her head. "I was told this venue was secured." "I don't have any paperwork because I was assured it was handled." The officer looked between them both, then back to me. "Do you want them removed?" "Yes," I said, "before anything else gets damaged." He nodded and turned toward the guests. "Folks, I need everyone to begin packing up. This is private property, and you're trespassing. The event is over." Karen exploded. "You can't do this. This is my daughter's big day. We already paid for everything." The officer didn't flinch. "Then you'll need to take that up with your vendors. You're lucky the owner here isn't pressing charges for trespassing." Karen turned to me, eyes full of hate. "You just love ruining people's joy, don't you?" I looked around at the trampled flowers, the ruined arch, the wrecked food table, and the crooked tent. Then I looked back at her and smiled. "Nope, I just love tractors." By the time the last car rolled off my property, leaving tire tracks through the flattened grass and bits of confetti tangled in the bushes, I stood near my tractor like a sentry guarding a victory. The sheriff stayed a few extra minutes to make sure the guests actually left and to log the details into his incident report. Karen had spent the entire time pacing near the road, alternately yelling at her wedding planner, her daughter, and eventually at the caterer, who had already called for a tow truck to rescue their sunken van from the soggy patch of ground. When the deputy finally pulled away, giving me a sympathetic nod and a quiet chuckle, I turned to the delivery driver, who had waited patiently through the chaos, and said, "Let's finish what we started." The tractor was unloaded and parked exactly where it should have been 3 hours ago, and the field was now clear. If you ignored the aftermath of a failed wedding. The next morning, I woke up to a strange pinging on my phone. At first, I thought it was just another appointment reminder, but then I noticed the number of notifications. My cousin had texted me a single word, viral, with a laughing emoji. Curious, I clicked into the link he sent and was immediately greeted by the thumbnail of a video titled "Karen's Wedding versus the Tractor." Someone had recorded nearly the entire debacle from a distance, zooming in as Karen screamed, the bride cried, and the tractor rolled calmly through the aisle runner like it had somewhere important to be. The video had over 200,000 views and was climbing fast. Reddit had gotten hold of it too. Their /entitled people thread was exploding with comments. Karen was officially branded Wedding Crashzilla, and someone had already made a meme of her yelling at the sheriff with the caption, "My special day." More like your eviction notice. It was both surreal and hilarious. The internet was eating it up. I had barely walked outside when one of my neighbors, a younger guy named Trent who lived a few plots over, drove past, honking and holding up a sign that read "Tractor Gang." I waved, shaking my head, but couldn't stop smiling. But the story didn't end there. By noon, I had 2 voicemail messages. One was from a local news outlet asking for a comment on the wedding incident, and the other was from Karen. Her tone was beyond furious. She accused me of humiliating her, said her daughter's marriage had been tainted, and demanded that I take down the video immediately. She even threatened legal action, saying I had orchestrated a malicious campaign against her. I didn't even post the video, but facts had never really been Karen's strong suit. I didn't bother calling her back. I had work to do. Still, I wasn't about to let her drag my name through the mud, so I compiled every piece of documentation I had: my scheduled delivery receipts, the text from the dealership, the property deed, photos of the posted private property signs, and even screenshots of Karen's own social media posts from 2 days before the wedding, where she bragged about getting the most picturesque lawn for free because some guy lives too far out to notice. The cherry on top was my tractor's onboard camera footage. The new model came with a built-in 360-degree camera system that recorded continuously during operation. I pulled the files and saved them to a hard drive, just in case things got legal. And they did. 2 days later, I was served with a notice from Small Claims Court. Karen was suing me for $5,000 in emotional damages and wedding loss recovery. According to her claim, I had maliciously disrupted a private event, damaged property, and defamed her character. I almost choked laughing. She had listed her own daughter's ruined wedding under losses incurred, and even included a line item for photography reshoots. I knew she was delusional, but this was a new level of theatrical nonsense. I immediately called my cousin Laura, a civil attorney who had helped me before with a zoning dispute. She agreed to represent me pro bono, mostly because she was thrilled at the opportunity to dismantle Karen's case in a courtroom. Laura was methodical and sharp, the kind of person who didn't just win arguments. She buried them in evidence and logic until the opposition had no ground left to stand on. We went over everything and prepared a full response to the court. Meanwhile, the video kept spreading. Someone made an auto-tuned remix of Karen yelling at the tractor. A parody account called At Tractor Blocked started posting Karen memes daily. I stayed quiet publicly, but privately, I found it impossible not to laugh every time someone emailed me a new edit. The best one was a fake movie trailer titled Law and Order, Tractor Victims Unit. When the court date finally arrived, I walked in wearing a clean shirt and jeans, calm and steady. Karen was already inside, wearing a dramatic black blazer and an expression that could curdle milk. Her eyes locked on mine like she thought she could intimidate me into surrender. Laura leaned in and whispered, "She's trying too hard. This will be over quick." The judge began the session by asking Karen to present her side. She stood and launched into a monologue worthy of a soap opera. She spoke of shattered dreams, betrayed trust, and public humiliation. She cried actual tears while describing how I had sent a machine of destruction barreling through her wedding, and delighted in her misery. The judge remained expressionless, but nodded politely. Then it was our turn. Laura stood calmly and handed over the evidence packet. She walked the judge through the scheduled delivery records, the security camera footage, the property ownership documents, and the video Karen herself had posted boasting about using my lawn without permission. She even highlighted the HOA records confirming my land was not under their jurisdiction, despite Karen referencing it in her claim. The judge raised an eyebrow, flipped through the folder, and looked up at Karen. "You stated in your filing that you had permission to use this land. Do you have any documentation proving that?" Karen stammered. "I was told by someone that the owner wouldn't mind." "Who told you?" "I don't remember his name. Maybe the groundskeeper, or maybe it was the florist." "Someone." The judge closed the folder. "Miss Karen, this case is dismissed with prejudice. You entered someone's private property without permission, hosted an event, and interfered with scheduled business operations. Consider yourself lucky the defendant didn't file counterclaims." Karen gasped. "This isn't justice. This is favoritism." The judge tapped the gavel once and said, "Next case." Outside the courtroom, Laura and I exchanged a high five. Karen stormed past us, muttering curses and threats under her breath. I let her go. She could scream all she wanted. The only thing she'd be hosting now was regret, and that, to me, was a far more fitting ending to her little fairy tale than any wedding ever could have been. Karen's meltdown after the courtroom defeat was the stuff of legend. By the time I got back home that day, 3 different neighbors had already texted me screenshots from a private Facebook group where Karen was ranting about judicial corruption and claiming the judge had been bribed by Big Tractor. Someone even screenshotted a post where she tried to convince people to boycott my property by reporting me for running an illegal wedding sabotage operation, whatever that meant. It was equal parts hilarious and pathetic, but I knew better than to underestimate someone like her. Karen wasn't the type to lose gracefully. She was the type to dig deeper, even if she was already neck deep in a hole she made herself. The irony was that I didn't even want to keep dealing with her. I had land to till, contracts to fulfill, and real work that didn't involve social media theatrics or courtroom drama. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally crawl back into whatever hallway meeting room spawned her and leave me alone. For about a week, it was blissfully quiet. I got back to work. The tractor was purring like a dream. The fields were coming along nicely. The only reminders of the wedding disaster were the occasional flower petals stuck in the bushes and some tire marks from her caterer's failed escape attempt. But of course, peace was never in Karen's vocabulary. It was a Thursday morning when I saw her again. This time she wasn't in heels or a blazer. She wore yoga pants, a visor, and an air of someone who believed the universe still owed her a grand apology. I was out by the barn, tightening bolts on a piece of irrigation equipment, when I heard the familiar whine of her SUV pulling up along the road. I didn't approach her. I didn't even turn around. I just waited. She called out my name like we were old friends. "Jack, I just want to talk." I took a slow breath and turned. Unless it's to apologize or hand me a signed confession, I'm not interested. She walked closer, arms folded. "Look, I know things got out of hand, but I think we can both agree that the internet made things worse, and I'm offering you a way out." I raised an eyebrow. A way out of what? My own property? Karen smiled like she had rehearsed it. "What if we do a makeup ceremony? A small one, just the photos. No guests, no noise. We could even stage it for the news so we resolve things. It'll clear your name and help me fix what the internet ruined." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "You want to use my lawn again? After everything?" She nodded as if that were the most reasonable request in the world. "Only this time, we'd do it properly. You could even be in the photos as a symbol of reconciliation. People love a redemption arc." I actually laughed then. It was a real, deep laugh that startled a nearby crow off the fence post. "Karen, the only arc happening here is your fall from grace. You hijacked my land, got humiliated, and now you think a second chance will make you the victim again." Her smile cracked for a second. "I'm just trying to make peace." "No, you're trying to save face," I replied. "And I'm not your PR tool. You sued me. You lied in court. You made a circus out of my home. Go make peace with someone else." Karen's expression twisted into something darker. "You think you've won, but people like you always slip up. You'll see." And with that, she left. I didn't see her again for a few days, but she wasn't idle. Oh no, she had one more play. I found out the following Monday when a city code enforcement officer showed up unannounced. The man was polite, clipboard in hand, but firm. He said he received multiple anonymous complaints about zoning violations on my property, including unauthorized agricultural operations, noise violations, and something about hazardous equipment near residential areas. I showed him my permits. I showed him the zoning designations. I gave him a tour of the property, and he quickly realized it was all nonsense. But as he left, he paused and said, "I'm guessing this has something to do with that wedding thing that went viral, huh?" I nodded. "Karen strikes again." He chuckled. "Well, everything checks out. If she files again, I'll personally ignore it." It was annoying but not surprising. Karen was lashing out any way she could. Petty reports, bad-mouthing me at HOA meetings, posting vague threats online. I didn't engage. I just kept working and let the ridiculousness unravel on its own. The internet hadn't forgotten her, and the more she tried to repair her image, the more people dug into her history. Someone found old reviews of her harassing local businesses. Another person posted a story from 5 years ago where she allegedly ruined a school fundraiser because her son didn't win a raffle. Her reputation was crumbling faster than her wedding cake. Then came the final blow. An email from a wedding vendor who had worked the event, the florist. She told me Karen hadn't paid a dime for the flower arrangements. She promised exposure, claiming a picturesque venue with a massive online audience. After the disaster, she ghosted all the vendors. The florist was reaching out because she saw my name in the news and hoped I could confirm the event was unauthorized. I did, happily. A few days later, Karen's name was listed in a small claims docket, not just from me, but from 3 vendors. The photographer, the florist, and the caterer were all suing her for unpaid invoices. The very people she threw under the bus were now throwing it back in reverse. That week, I sat on my porch with a cold drink and watched the sun set over the field. The tractor rested near the barn, silent and majestic. My property was finally at peace. The land healed, and the ridiculous chaos Karen had brought was slowly being buried under her own mess. And as the wind rustled the grass, I spotted one last piece of confetti stuck in a fence post. I plucked it free, held it up to the light, and smiled. Some people plan weddings. Others plan consequences. And Karen got both. It had been almost a month since the wedding chaos unfolded on my lawn, and though the dust had settled, the legend of Karen's ill-fated ceremony had only grown. People in town started calling it the Great Wedding Heist, as if it had been some kind of bold crime spree, instead of just garden-variety entitlement wrapped in tulle and pearls. What surprised me most wasn't the fact that people were still talking about it, but that it had become a sort of weird symbol for standing your ground. I had strangers come up to me at the feed store and say things like, "You're the tractor guy, right? Man, you handled that better than I ever would have." Some folks dropped by just to get a look at the now infamous lawn, as if they were visiting a crash site. It was surreal, but the truth was, I hadn't done any of it to be a hero. I just didn't want to be pushed off my own property. Still, the viral spotlight had its perks. A local farm equipment supplier offered me a discount on attachments for the tractor just for mentioning them in passing during an interview. A small YouTube channel that covered everyday justice stories reached out and asked if I'd let them film a reenactment. I declined the reenactment, but agreed to an interview, and within a week, their video hit 1 million views. Even the sheriff's deputy, who showed up that day, ended up in the comments section with a laughing emoji and a glad I could help. But my favorite part came a little later. I got an email from a couple who'd seen the video and were interested in renting the field, not for a wedding, but for a photo shoot. They explained that they were professional photographers who specialized in real-life backdrops with actual stories. I told them, sure, as long as they signed a release and agreed not to move a single blade of grass without my say-so. They were respectful, polite, and sent me copies of the photos afterward. One shot of the tractor with the setting sun in the background was so good I printed it and framed it in the barn. While the world moved on and Karen faded into something like digital infamy, I decided it was time to do something permanent with the lawn, something that made it clear to anyone with future wedding fantasies that my property wasn't a community stage. So I built a sign, not a small one. This was a 6-foot wooden post dug deep into the ground with a carved oak slab bolted on it. It read, "Private property. No weddings. No photo shoots. No exceptions. Tractor has right of way." I installed it right where Karen had parked her SUV, the place where the ceremony aisle had been laid out like a red carpet to nowhere. The sign wasn't just practical. It became a conversation piece. People stopped to take selfies with it. One guy even asked if he could make a t-shirt version and sell it online. I didn't mind. If anything, the whole situation gave me a story to tell when things got quiet around here, and it reminded me why I didn't back down in the first place. You don't just let people walk over you, especially not in heels while holding a bouquet they didn't pay for. Of course, it couldn't end without one last twist. A few weeks after the court ruling, I got a visit from a woman who looked vaguely familiar. She parked respectfully by the road and walked up the gravel path, carrying a small white envelope. It was Karen's former bridesmaid. She introduced herself, apologized for the intrusion, and said she just wanted to deliver something. She handed me the envelope and said, "You probably don't care, but I thought you deserved to see this." Then she left without another word. Inside the envelope was a letter, not from Karen, but from her daughter, the bride. It was short, just a few paragraphs. She explained that she had no idea the wedding was taking place on private land until the day of, that her mother had lied to everyone involved, and that she was embarrassed and mortified by everything that had happened. She said she and Trevor had postponed the honeymoon, then eventually the marriage itself, and were now re-evaluating everything. The last sentence stuck with me. It read, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I am sorry. You didn't deserve what happened, and I wish someone had stood up to her sooner." I stood there for a long time with that letter in my hand. The wind tugged at the corners, and I thought about how many people had just gone along with Karen's plan, too afraid or too indifferent to stop her. It wasn't really about one wedding anymore. It was about the way people let someone steamroll through life, assuming no one would ever push back. But they had. I had. And now, maybe, just maybe, that daughter wouldn't grow up into the same kind of person. That night, I sat on the porch as the sun went down and listened to the wind whisper through the tall grass. The confetti was long gone. The chairs, the tents, the arguments, they had all faded into the soil like a bad memory finally decomposed. But the land was still mine. The tractor still stood tall. And the next crop was ready to grow. I raised a glass to the horizon, nodded once, and said, "Here's to fences, boundaries, and very loud engines." Because sometimes peace isn't quiet. Sometimes it comes on 4 wheels and steel tracks, and it reminds the world that even the calmest man has his limits, especially when his lawn becomes the battlefield for someone else's fantasy.